Well, begin with the Mishnah on Daf Pevav Amid Beis and go through Daf Pei Zayin. We'll have three Mishnahs, a Mishnah on Daf Pevav, a Mishnah on Daf Pei Zayin Amid Aleph, and one at the end of Daf Pei Zayin. So the Mishnah on Daf Pevav begins with the sugya of what happens if somebody's made for a neder, but it was wrong one. He made a mistake. So the Mishnah talks about three types of mistakes. One is he's not sure who made the neder. He thought it was his wife. Turns out that it was his daughter. He thought it was his daughter. Turns out it was his wife. Either way, it was someone who he had the ability to be made for. It was just a wrong one. Second case is where he didn't know what type of neder was made. He thought it was Naziris, and turns out it was Karbanos. Or he thought it was Karbanos, and it turns out to be Naziris. And the third one is he didn't know what the neder was about. Here is where we knew that it was a konum carbon neder, but he thought it was grapes, and it was really figs, or vice versa. In all these cases, the neder is not chal, and you have to do the hafara that is not chal, and it has to be made for again. So the Gemara assumes the Gemara assumes that the reason that he has to get it exactly right is because the pasuk says Yoni Isa. He restrains her. So her means has to refer to her specifically, has to know and be correct as to who and what he's referring to. He has to know which person, either the wife or the daughter, and not be wrong about that. And so too, the other details have to be correct as well. So Gemara says we have a kash on that from Hilchos Kriya, that is, someone is obligated to tear his clothing if he hears about the death of a close relative or a rebbe or a gadol, and it has to be there. We have a drasha that would seem to say that he also has to know who it was exactly, and that's because the Torah, when describing the kriya on Shaul and on Yonasan, so it says al Shaul va'al Yonasan, and that would seem to indicate on each one specifically. So the Gemara compares that to where it says Yoni Osa, just like Osa is on her specifically. Al Shal and Al Yonas is on them specifically. The language of the pasuk is specific. So if you're telling me that Yoni Osa has to be specific, you know who it is, so then Kriya should also have to be specific, you know who it is. However, there's a brisa that says that one does not have to be correct as to who their Kriya is on. The brisa says if they told someone that his father died, and he tore Kriya, and then it turns out that it was actually his son that died, the Kriya, he's yet to the Kriya, doesn't have to do Kriya again. So why? If the drush is true, the same halacha should apply, that he should have to do kriya again because it was on the wrong individual. So my answer is that Bryce is not talking about where he thought it was one person, it turned out to be someone else. It's talking about where he didn't know who it was, and it turned out to be someone else. I mean, there's three ways you could have understanding. There's three levels of understanding a person could have about a fact. He could have the right fact, the wrong fact, or in between where he has no fact. He doesn't know what it is. So this Bryce is not talking about where he has the wrong fact. It's the wrong fact. Of course, the pasuk teaches me you have to do it again. It's talking about where he doesn't know. So the Gemara brings a brisa to support that this is actually the correct halacha. So the brisa says if somebody is told that his father died and he tears kriya, and then it turns out that it was his son, not to answer the kriya, has to do kriya again. However, if you just told him that someone died, he assumed it was his father, and he did kriya under his own assumption, but not with knowledge that it was his father, and then it turns out that it was his son, that is the case where he's yaitz the kriya, because he didn't have a wrong fact, he just had no fact, and he doesn't have to do it again. That is the Gemara's first answer to explain that there's no contradiction as to how these drushes work. The Gemara's second answer is that the brisa that says that he doesn't have to do kriya again is talking about where he got the correct information toch de dibur, within a very short amount of time. The time it takes for someone to say Shalom Alecha Rebbe, or possibly Shalom Alecha Rebbe Umeri, very short amount of time. Within that time, it's still considered to be within the time span of the original action. So if he finds out within that time of the original kriya who the correct person was, it's still considered to be that the kriya applies to that, and he doesn't have to tear his clothing again. However, in our case, the neder that he heard, the correction was after that time, and therefore it doesn't help. It cannot correct his afar. He has to do a new afar. Same thing would apply to kriya. If it's after the time of Toch Kidei Dibur, he would have to do a new kriya. Now, the Gemara brings a brisa. Someone to that says someone who has a sick person in his house, and the person faints, and he assumed that he died, and he tears kriya, and then after that the person faints. And then after that the person dies, he hadn't actually died yet. Whether or not he's yotze, that kriya depends on how long after he did the kriya the person had died. And this is spelled out by Rav Shimon ben Pazi, and Rav Shua ben Levi, and Rav Bar Kapara, who says that if it was in Toch Kidei Dibur, the kriya works, and if it's after Toch Kidei Dibur, the kriya does not work. and he has to do Kriya again, and that is just like we said the halacha here. Now the Gemara ends off by saying that there are 4 halachas to which Tochid Dibur doesn't matter. Normally Tochid Dibur means that it still applies to whatever's within that time span. 4 halachas where you can't change something even Tochid Dibur, and that is Magadef Avodah Zara, Mekadesh and Megarish. So those are if somebody curses the shame, Chas v'shalom, and then he says, oh, I didn't mean it, or I'm taking it back, too late. Even Tochidei Dibur, you can't undo that. Avodah Zarah, if somebody vows allegiance to an Avodah Zarah, he violates an Isra Avodah Zarah, he can't change it even Tochidei Dibur. So he's Mekadesh a woman, he says, I read Mekadeshesli, and then he changes his mind Tochidei Dibur, it's too late, it's already Chal Kiddushin, and she needs a get, and she's also to Kohanim, and if he divorces his wife and then he takes it back Toch Kidei Dibur, that also is too late and he needs to do a new Kiddushin. For the Mefarshim explain, because of these are so serious halachas, are so severe, you can't just have a Toch Kidei Dibur be considered to be part of it. You got to make sure you know what you're doing before you do it. Now we begin the next Mishnah, which discusses what happens when you have a 2-part neder, and the husband responds to one part of it, either with hafara or kiyum. How does that affect the other part, and what happens? The Mishnah will bring one opinion, then the Gemara will quote a brisa with a second opinion, and then we'll have an Amora who will bring a third Tana with yet a third opinion. So what's the case? The case is where a lady says, I'm making a neder and I'm asering figs and grapes. Now the husband could respond either by being meifir, just the figs, or by being mekayim, just the figs. And what is the halacha in those two cases? So there's 3 possibilities as to what the halacha is. Let's talk about kiyum first. The kiyum could apply only to the figs that he was mekayim, have no effect on the grapes. Or you could say the kiyum works for the figs and for the grapes. Or you could say since it was only partial, the kiyum doesn't work for anything. Now, you can say the same thing for hafara. The hafara could work just for the figs, for the figs and the grapes, or for nothing. So our Mishnah says that the halacha is that there's a difference between kiyum and hafara. As far as kiyum, the halacha is that if he's mekayim just the figs, it's mekayim the neder for everything, and the entire neder works. And that's learned out of the pasuk that says isha yikimenu, that even if we read it as yakim mimenu, even if he's only mekayim part of it, it's a full hakama, and the entire neder, the figs and the grapes together are all mekayim. However, hafara is different because it does not say yaferenu or yafer mimenu, and therefore a hafara that applies to just the figs is not a hafara for the grapes as well. Which of the other 2 possibilities is it? The Ran's not sure. The Ran says it could go either way. It could be that it's hafara for none, or it could be that it's a hafara just for the figs, but it cannot be that hafara for the figs counts for the figs and for the grapes. Now, the Gemara quotes a brisa. The brisa says over our Mishnah in the name of Rabbi Shmuel, that opinion that a hafara works only for the one and it doesn't work for both. That's Rabbi Shmuel's opinion. And the Gemara quotes, the brisa quotes Rabbi Akiva, who disagrees. Rabbi Akiva says just like a kiyum for the figs works for the grapes as well, a hafara for the figs works for the grapes as well. Now the Gemara asks, what is this machlokes about? So the Gemara explains that Rabbi Akiva has a hekesh between hafara and kiyum. It says isha yikimenu ve'isha yifirenu, links the 2, just like by yikimenu it says mimenu, and from there you learn that a kiyum for one works for both. So too for hafara, a hafara for one works for both. Rabbi Shmuel disagrees. Rabbi Shmuel says no, it doesn't say mimenu by hafara, it only says mimenu by kiyum, and therefore by kiyum on part works for the entire thing. By hafara on part does not work for the entire thing, and he doesn't have the hekesh. Then the Gemara quotes Rabbi Abin and Rabbi Yochanan, who says is actually a third opinion, and that is the Chachamim, and they say they do have the hekesh, but it goes the other way. Just like by hafara, the hafara only works for what you may fear, so too by kiyum, the kiyum only works for what you may fear. It takes away the drasha of mimenu. Now, the Mishnah had brought another half. And the other half was to say that if she makes the neder separately, she says, I'm not going to eat figs, and Also, I'm not going to eat grapes. There is no shaila that a kiyum or a far for one does not affect the other. So Marcus Ravu says this is the opinion of Reb Shimon, who says that she has to stay separately. Shvul chol echad ve'echad. She has to make each neder or each separate, or each shua separate for each part of it, and that way you can differentiate those halachos. We now get to our last Mishnah. This discusses a case where the husband did not know one of the key halachas he's supposed to know. So there's two cases. First of all, he says, I knew that there's such a thing as Nedarim, but I didn't know that there was a halacha that could be made for them. So then even after the day has passed, he could still go ahead and be Mayfair. He has until nightfall after he finds out. Second case is where he knew there's a halacha afar, but the neder that she made, he didn't think that was important. He didn't think it was something that he needed to be Mayfair. Here you have Machlokes. So the mayor says he can't be Mayfair any longer, and the Chachamim say he still can.